What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another healer build. So for Morrowind, as you may imagine, Templars got kind of wrecked. Well, it's not really, but they're harder to play now, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So I wanted to show you guys my build. Everything is updated, skills, champion points, and all that stuff. So let's get started. I'll show you the attributes first, and then we'll go over everything as usual. So the way I have mine built, I have 50 into magic and 14 into health. Mostly this is just for survivability. Hold on, let's use food real quick to show you like full numbers. But yeah, I ideally have around 19,000 health just because some of the newer trials have a lot more mechanics and I want to actually learn how to do them efficiently. That's why my health is a bit higher. But I feel like anything above 18,000 for a healer is just generally good. But until I learn how to master the newer stuff, then I'm just kind of playing it a little bit more safely. But usually as a healer, not dying is good, so I'm pretty sure just having 19,000 is good as well. And then our Mundus Stone is the Atronach, because Magicka recovery is pretty good. It was pretty much the only Mundus Stone healers used even before Morrowind, and so we're just staying with it with Morrowind just because Magicka recovery is good. And then, yeah. So with that said, let's get into the skills and then the champion points and everything else. So actually, let's go into the gear first. There's a few sets that I actually use and switch out to, so this is going to be a little bit more detailed. So your main set that you're going to always be using is Spell Power Gear. This has been best in slot for, I don't know, years now, and it still remains best in slot. So Spell Power Gear is definitely something you want to go for. The way you obtain it is White Gold Tower, and I think you can get those little key fragments and get pieces from that as well. So normal White Gold Tower, you can get the blue one. Veteran, you get purple. If you want the jewelry, I would recommend doing it on Veteran because you can only get purple jewelry from that. And yeah, so number one thing, if you learned anything from this video, is Spell Power Gear is best in slot. Get it. So the next set we use is the Worm set. Now, as a short recap, Worm is one of the better ones to use as your second set as a healer, and then it's Mending. So right now what I have equipped is Worm. Unfortunately, I don't have the golden jewelry that comes out of the golden vendors, but next time I see it, I'll probably upgrade. We don't use a monster set because we don't really need it. And we just have 5 spell power pieces on here, and then 2 and 3 jewelry, so 5 over here. So I know the weapons right here you guys are going to see is not obtainable by everyone, and that's okay. If you don't have the Master's Resto Staff or a Maelstrom Lightning Staff, that's fine. You can just use whatever staff, any like set, it doesn't matter. But yeah, if I were to use a random set or random like whatever, the Resto Staff would be powered 100%, and the Lightning Staff would be sharpened or like charged, just because you get the extra stuff from it. But yeah, so you get Master's Resto Staff from Dragonstar Arena, or the veteran version, and then Maelstrom obviously from Maelstrom Arena. But if you have them, that's great. The enchantments are really fantastic. If you don't have them, unfortunately, any staff will do, as long as it's lightning staff back bar. And then, yeah, so some replacements for, well, actually not replacements, but just other things I use in general are, instead of Worm, I use the Mending set, which you get in Ethereal Archive. You can get it on normal or veteran. It just depends on whatever difficulty. You just get a blue one, which you can upgrade to gold. And if you want the best jewelry, you gotta do veteran or hard mode to get a better drop rate. So Mending is good just because you increase the healing done, and it reduces the weapon damage of all enemies in the area. So if you're learning new things like trials, having a group not wipe is generally a good thing. After that, we have the Infallible Aether set. Now, I don't really use this set often. It's more for like 4-man groups, not trials. But I still do use it, just not in trials. Only like dungeons or Dragonstar. That's where Infallible would be good. But other than that, if you're doing trial content or playing like solo, I guess, Worm and spell power or mending is generally the way to go. But if you don't have any of the like trial or dungeon gear, you could craft Kagrenac, Julianos, get some willpower. All of those are buyable from the market, or you could just craft them yourself. But I would honestly recommend trying to get at least Worm, because that one you can obtain in Vaults of Madness, and that one's relatively easy. You can do it on normal and still get the same pieces. So yeah, those are my recommendations. There are crafted stuff like Kagrenacs, but you have to do some of the main story, and then willpower you just get it from doing random dungeons, I guess, or you can just buy it. So yeah, that's been the gear I use, and let's go on to the skills. Now this hasn't really changed much. I did change a few morphs from last time. Right now we still use Repentance because of when it's slotted, you get all these minor like passive abilities as long as you have it. So the change of Repentance they made was that it no longer affected your allies. So it only is like a self-cast ability. So when you cast it, only you regen health and stamina, and your group mates don't get it anymore. So that's kind of upsetting, but a lot of people still use it simply because you get the minor fortitude, endurance, intellect, and you just get a lot of recovery back. And next on our abilities, we have Healing Springs. It is under the Resto tree. Healing Springs is your main spammable AoE heal. Make sure, like, when you're grouped up, you just toss Healing Springs down, and as long as people are standing in it, then they get healed. And this also works well with the Master's Resto Staff. So, like the Grand Healing, which is the non-morph, whatever it's called, Healing Springs, it restores stamina to them as well. So you're getting like 2 effects in one, especially since Healing Springs is your main spammable. So now you just get magic whenever they're in it, and then your allies will get stamina and they get healed, so it just works together. If you don't have it, it's not really a big deal. It's just like min-maxing is min-maxing, so that's why I use it. And then Combat Prayer is like a straight line heal. It's very strong. Pretty much every healer should use this one. If your group mates are standing in a straight line, they get a buff, and it increases their damage done by 8%, and physical resistance and spell resistance are increased. So the way this works is, for example, I'll just show you. Your Healing Springs is a circle, and then you just toss it down. And then if your allies are standing in a straight line, you use Combat Prayer, which is the straight line you guys can see right here. Oh, you can't attack that Gwar. Alright. So you just cast it in a straight line. Nowadays, in Dungeons and Trials, because they changed a few of the ability effects, you're going to want to position yourself behind the DPS. Before you could just like spam Breath of Life around wherever. Now it's a cone ability, so that means it only heals people in front of you. So that means your job as a healer, you have to stand in the back. You can't just stand wherever. Positioning is actually a little bit more important now, so you just have to make note of that, and it takes a little bit of practice. So, which brings us to our next ability, Breath of Life. You shouldn't be spamming this ability. It's more of like an emergency heal because it does cost a lot, but it is a very strong heal. And it's kind of like if your group mates fall below, I don't know, like 30% immediately, that's when you start spamming it. Well, not like spamming it, but like make sure to cast that over the other 2 healing abilities. So next we have Inner Light. It is under the Mage's Guild. It's like the first thing you get, so everyone should have it. And what it does is increase your max magic and give you spell critical rating. So essentially, you get a higher base heal, and when you crit, you just heal higher. That's why we have Inner Light on our main bar. And then, of course, if you want to get the passives, the increase your magicka recovery and max magicka for each one slotted, this works really well with the Meteor ability, which is the ultimate for the Mage's Guild. So when you have this passive, the Magicka Controller, you get a 4% bonus. So it increases your base Magicka and your recovery. That means you're healing for higher numbers. So generally you want to have those on your main bar. And then next, we're going onto our back bar. This is where things get a little bit tricky because as long as you have a lightning staff, this works. If you don't Just use a double resto, and I'm sure you'll be fine. But ideally, you want a lightning staff. This works for dungeons and trials, and you're the person who's going to be casting like LA Drain and Blockade. That's the healer's job, in my opinion. So our first ability, we have Luminous Shards. Before, I used to use Blazing Spears to give stamina back to everyone. Now, I think it still does that, but now it's just magic, and you get a higher magic base. Now, the reason why I have Luminous Shards instead of Blazing is nowadays stamina DPS is not really that viable for competitive rating. So if you're going for leaderboard scores, you'll notice that everyone is playing a magic DPS these days. And Luminous Shards just gives a lot more magic, and the Blazing one gives stamina as well. So the people I play with, everyone's pretty much magic. That's why you rather just give a higher base of magic instead of stamina. That's why I use Luminous. But if you're just playing casually, I don't think the morph really matters. But if you're looking for a competitive like score trials, then Luminous is slightly better. And then next we have our Blockade of Storms, which is under the Destruction Staff. It's the Elemental Blockade. Now this one is important because if you have the Lightning Staff, you have the passive for the Thaumaturge in the Ritual Tree. So you're the person that's going to be using the Exploiter. And the reason why I don't have 75 in here is because I'm still like I kind of switch this out depending on who I'm playing with, and especially increases your damage over time. With 75 into here, you get the Exploiter passive. When you off-balance enemies with your Lightning Staff, you do more damage. And then, yeah, so next we have the Energy Orb. Now, before I used to use the Mystic Orb. Nowadays, I just use Energy Orb. It's not max because it takes so long to level it. But it's at 3. This is morphed. The Energy Orb versus the Mystic Orb. The Mystic Orb is a blue orb that, when it's close to the enemies, it deals a little bit of damage, while the Energy one, it heals your allies instead of doing damage. So, as a healer, I honestly think the Energy Orb is the better morph nowadays, just because the slight healing, it kind of prevents emergencies, and then the after effect, when they hit the synergy, you can get resources back. So to this day, I think Energy Orb is better than Mystic Orb, but realistically both morphs are fine. But I just like having the extra heal instead of damage. Next we have Ritual of Retribution. Now this ability is like, I think you can swap it out depending on what you're doing. You could either have Channeled Focus or like the Ritual, or you can have Puncturing Sweeps. It really just depends what you're doing, or you can have Power of the Light, Radiant. But I use Ritual of Retribution just because it's a very large AoE heal. So when you're in a small like area, you just toss down this ability. You see that huge circle around you. That's what you're going to be casting. Anyone who's standing in it, they get well, 1, they get healed, and then 2, they get extra stuff, like they can cast this or hit the synergy with it, so that's good, and it affects a lot. Next is our also this is another change slot depending on what you want. If you want to have Channeled Focus on there, I use Elemental Drain because as a healer, it's usually your job to be applying the Elemental Drain on bosses and enemies. So it allows your DPS, or the group DPS, to be slightly higher, and they don't have to run it, and you do because you have the extra slot to do it. So essentially, I'm sure a lot of you guys know what Elemental Drain does. It reduces the enemy spell resistance and allows your magic DPS characters to do more. So as I mentioned earlier, most people in competitive raids are magic DPS these days, so Elemental Drain is good. And yeah, if you had some stamina in your group, you would also use Power of the Light instead. So like, let's say if you're in a 4 or 12-man trial, do you have more magic characters or magic DPS, or do you have more stamina? If you have more stamina, then you would be running Power of the Light instead of Elemental Drain. But if you have more magic, you run Elemental Drain instead of Power of the Light. And that's how I think it works. If you want to take out shards, I don't think taking out shards is a good idea, because it is a synergy and it like just works well with other people in your group. But if you don't want to use it, you can always use Radiant Oppression. That is also a very solid ability. And yeah, so let's get right champion points now, because I'm sure a lot of you guys are curious about that one. Yeah, so let's start off with our green tree. We have 90 into Arcanist and 90 into Tenacity. Now, Arcanist has always been one that we use, except now that the ones over here, I forgot what they were called, honestly. They kind of just got changed around a little. So I have 20 into Tumbling because I do roll dodge quite often. This one is kind of optional. You don't actually need it as much, but I find myself roll dodging quite often, more than I should. Then I have 90 into Tenacity because when you charge a heavy attack, which is what healers do a lot, you restore Magicka and Stamina. And then Arcanist because it's kind of good. And then after that we have 10 into Warlord, and that's just more to break free, but that one's kind of optional. If you wanted to have like 30 into Warlord instead of any Tumbling, that is also fine. Or if you wanted 30 Tumbling, that is also what works for you. But the most important one is to balance your Arcanist and Tenacity tree. This is what I use. If you found something that works better, then use that one. But I find that having the extra in here is generally good. Next is our red tree. This one is kind of something I play with often, depending on what trial I do. I kind of switch it out a little bit. But I do have 49 into Hardy, Elemental Defender, and Thick Skinned. Now, the reason why we don't have like 80 or 90 into each of these is because Elemental Defender and Hardy don't scale as well as it did before. So that way, having the 30 extra points means absolutely nothing. I've tested it in Maw of Lorcage. I just kept dying with like 90 into each. So the ideal thing to have these days is pretty much Ironclad. And this pretty much reflects, or not reflects, but like reduces the damage taken. I do have 1 into Spell Shield. It sorta helps, but I was just considering either having 62 into Ironclad and 61 into 1. But overall, I think having the extra flat reduction is slightly better than the having a percentage. And then after that, we have 1 into Expert Defender. It reduces your damage taken from late and heavy attacks. We only have 1 point into this just because 0.7% is better than 0. So I think it helps a little bit. You're not going to see a huge difference, but I kind of just like having that 1 point into there. But if you learned anything from the red tree, is Ironclad is important. Hardy and Elemental Defender don't scale as well as it did. And Thick Skin is a little bit more important than it was now. I've always used it, but pre-Morrowind I only had like 23 points into it. Now I have around 50. It just kind of works together. So now onto our final tree. As a healer, you want to have Blessed maxed out because obviously you're the healer, to healing done, and that one is important. Elfborn, we have 100 now into this one because it increases your healing by critical strikes. And so essentially what this one does, Blessed, increases your flat healing rate. So for example, if you had 0 into Blessed and you healed for 2,000, now you do 15% more of that 2,000. And if you have Elfborn, let's say you're doing, I don't know, if you crit heal, then it does more. And then we have some points into Spell Erosion. I'm still kind of testing this one, but I think Spell Erosion is good. And then we have 1 into Staff Expert, just because I think the 0.7% once again is slightly better than having the 1 extra point into Spell Erosion. That gives you like 100 extra penetration, or you can have 0.7%, increases your damage from light and heavy, destruction, resto staves. So that's what I use. Keep in mind, all of this could change. So if you found something that works for you, I would highly recommend just using that one. But this is what works for me, and I've completed all the high-end trials. And yeah, so I think I covered everything. There's a few more things I want to talk about. In terms of food, you're going to be using the same old blue food, the blue health and magic recovery. So the difference between blue and purple is the purple one gives you all 3 stats. like health, magicka, and stamina. However, the catch to that is it doesn't give you nearly as much. So the purple one would give you like 3,000 of each stat, whereas the blue one will give you like 5,000 health and like 5,000 of each health and magic instead of 3,000. So the 2,000 extra actually matters. That's why we use the blue one. And in terms of potions, we use the same old essence of spell power. Now, these are getting kind of expensive, so if you could craft them yourselves, then I would highly recommend doing that. To craft it, what you would need is corn flour. I'll actually show you right now. I think I know it. Where's alchemy? So yeah, you need obviously the level 150 Lorcan's Tears. Then you need corn flour. Where is it? Sorry, I'm just like blanking out. You could use Namira's Rot as well, or Water Hyacinth and Lady Smock. This will give you the whatever the spell damage, spell critical, and restore magic with recovery. So that's what I use. Or you can just buy it from the store if you don't have everything maxed. That works too. But it is kind of expensive just because a lot of people are playing magic characters these days. And pretty much everyone uses the same thing. That's why it's expensive. So yeah, overall, just as a little recap for this video, in terms of gear, I highly recommend going for spell power gear because that is still best in slot. And then in terms of your second set, you could use Worm. A lot of people use Worm now, even though it got nerfed from 5% to 4% reduced cost. It's still good. And then Mending is also another good set. And Infallible Aether, this one is more for 4-man content like Dungeons and Dragonstar. So, yeah. And then other things to get are the Master and Maelstrom weapons, which I know is very hard to get. If you don't have them, just use any old staff. It doesn't matter what kind. But the traits do matter. If you are using a random staff, make sure to get powered for the resto. And you could use charged or sharpen for your lightning. And those also work. But yeah, overall, that has been pretty much everything. If I missed something, feel free to let me know. In terms of your rotation, it's not as simple as doing it on a DPS where you have a fixed rotation. Healers are more situational depending on what's happening. So ideally, before the fight starts, you want to cast Elemental Drain or Power of the Light on, whatever you're attacking. And then you would want to toss down a Ritual of Retribution before the fight starts, just so everyone gets healed immediately. And then the first thing you would do is toss down Healing Springs and then Combat Prayer, just like in a line to spam Combat Prayer so everyone gets the 8-second buff. And then once the fight starts, you're going to be tossing the energy orbs. And what that does is it allows your tank or whoever, whatever person takes it, to hit the synergy. And then you would use the Blockade of Storms to off-balance AoE if you're fighting a lot of trash mobs. And then I would think actually Blockade of Storms, you cast that one first. And then you toss your synergies, which is Energy Orb and Luminous. And then Ritual of Retribution should already be up because this is a 12-second cast. So having these up at all times is good. And Repentance nowadays is kind of... It only works for yourself now, so you don't have to spam it anymore. And then Healing Springs and Combat Prayer are your main ones. So essentially what it looks like is that you're standing in here. If all your buffs are up, everything should kind of look like that. So that's kind of what it looks like in a nutshell. But really, I don't have a rotation for this. It's more situational. If someone's almost dying, you just kind of stop whatever you're doing and Breath of Life spam. So with that said, back bar we have a Warhorn because your tank and the healer should be running Warhorn and not your DPS. But I don't know. It's really situational depending on what you're doing. But overall, I hope you at least learned a little bit of my champion points, the gear. If you don't have the gear, I made some replacements in the beginning of the video, and the weapons I used, the potions, attributes, I used Atronach, and then how you build your health and magic is really up to you. I would highly recommend staying above 18,000 with food though, just because Like in veteran trials, it's kind of important to stay above that number, just so you don't get one-shotted. Especially as a healer, you are very important to your group. So, with that said, thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. If you learned it, or let me know how it works for you. And yeah, feel free to leave a comment and let me know if it's good or bad. And with that said, thanks for watching.